Hello, welcome back to our podcast. Today we'll be speaking about race, religion, and language. In many cases, religion has been the bedrock of nation building, and even in today's day and age, it is difficult to separate the number of national identities from the religious matrices. Religion identifies is based on and perpetuated in narratives expressed in a specific language. Today we are discussing the dangers behind race, religion, and language. Hello, Tom. Hello, David.
Hey, how are you, Jordan? Good to see you, man.
Hey, Jordan.
Good to see you. Good to see you, David. Pastor Dave, I should say. So yeah, today we're talking about race, religion, and language. Just kind of touching on the subject, kind of getting started. Any of you have a idea of what you think is most dangerous? Is it race, religion, or language, in your opinion?
When you say dangerous, can you kind of frame that for me? When you say dangerous, I think of a lot of things.
Yeah, I think that question goes to me. And danger is the danger of dividing the country. So it's the danger of getting to the point where the country is so divided that the government can't operate anymore. That's the danger.
Okay. Pastor Dave, did you have something to say about that?
I agree with Tom if that's the context. If the context is race, religion, or language, does it have the power to cause separation? Definitely, all three of them can. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree with you guys, especially in today's day and age. It seems to be more rampant. I've been noticing. How does language affect, race and ethnicity, in your guys' opinion?
I'll take that right off. When I think about race and ethnicity, it kind of targets people groups, and all people groups have a type of race, and every people group has its own ethnicity, and in that, it can be a welcoming tag or it can be a threatening tag. It just depends on what context you're in and how are your people group viewed, and how is your language viewed. For some it's a welcoming, for others it can be extremely divisive.
Yeah, to my way of thinking of it, the most important thing in democracy is debate. We have to be able to communicate with each other in a way that is, where we can plan out what we're going to do next. And if we don't have the same language, I think it's really difficult to do that. I think that when you translate things from one language to another, the meanings get obscured. You know that from your Bible study, Reverend. The original Aramaic, you can't translate that into English. And there's a lot of doubt about, or debate about what the words really mean if you try to translate them into English. So to me, trying to run a democracy with two different languages is reckless. And when they tried to set up democracy in Europe after World War I, that's the way they divided up the countries. They divided them up by language. So the people who spoke German got one language. The people who spoke French got another language. And if they had two religions, that wasn't quite as important as the language thing. But I think for me, a democracy with two languages is just something that I don't think you have a lot of historical examples where that it has worked out. One of the examples right now would be like Belgium, where they have Flemish and they have the two language, one's like French and the other's like Dutch. And the country really struggles. The division between the languages is really hard to bridge. The government of Belgium doesn't work right because the people of Belgium speak two different languages. So to me, language is by far the most important division, potential risk, danger for any democracies to have more than one language.
Well, Tom, or Jordan, can I ask a question then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that mean then that there cannot be any acknowledgement of a different language in a country that if there are in your illustration the Flemish as well as those who are speaking French or whatever, um, does it automatically mean that one can be spoken and the other one cannot be spoken to have a safe government? I guess that's the question. And I'm just throwing that out there quickly, Tom.
Yeah, what they do in Belgium is they have separate legislatures for the two languages.
Mm-hmm.
So it's it's one central government, but each language has their own legislature where they can deal with their own issues on their own, and that's probably the best way to do it. I think if you have a country with two languages, and let's say that 90% of the people speak one language and 10% of the people speak another language, I would view that as a bilingual democracy, and the 10% have to be just as important as the 90% to make the system work. The 90% are going to have to reach out to the 10% on a constant basis to reassure them that you're part of the team. We include you. If you don't do that, it won't work.
Well, that's what I was alluding to, is that there still is inclusion.
Yeah,
It
has to be a power sharing thing, and it can't be based on numbers. Well, we have 50,000 people and you have 40,000, so that makes us right. No, it's that doesn't make you right just because you have more numbers. Yeah.
Tom, real quick, explain your statement. Current political culture simply states that if diversity interferes in the individual is defective. Now, what did you mean by that?
What I mean by that is I think there's very little forgiveness in our current political culture or current popular culture for anybody who struggles with diversity. In other words, if anybody struggles with diversity, it's the person themselves that are the bad person. It's not like, hey, we understand that this is difficult trying to deal with the people who speak a different language than you. There's very little acceptance that if the people speak a different language than you, they're a different religion than you, then it might be hard to relate to them, interact with them on a democratic basis. What I'm saying by that is that the current popular culture puts 100% of the blame on the citizen for not being able to deal with diversity. But when you look at the history of democracy, it's very difficult to deal with diversity. Yugoslavia, you got all kinds of examples where democracy in Iraq and Afghanistan, of course, where democracy came and people struggled with diversity. So what I would like to see is a political culture where when people struggle with diversity, it's okay. It's a human condition that we're trying to deal with. And just to put it in a little bit more human terms, when I think of democracy, I always think of a book club where you come together and you read a book and you discuss it like we were doing at Abyssinian, and then you go out to lunch afterwards. And so then you have to decide where you're going to go to lunch. And if you do something like that, people will divide up really quickly, that there's some people that want inexpensive, some people who want low fat, and you'll divide up into groups. And so to me, the history of democracy, the weakness of democracy is that we divide up into groups. And if we don't recognize that that's the weakness and that's the tendency to do it, just blaming the individual doesn't really help.
Okay. Well, as a nation, do we need to help with the diversity struggle, and how do we do that, and how do we even start?
The way we start by
where do we start?
Yeah. So to me, the place that we start is by recognizing that the biggest problem in democracy is it makes the people turn on each other. That's the problem with democracy. Even if you had just perfect, no one race, one language, one religion, all that, you're still going to have personality differences. And the problem with democracy, if you look at the history of democracy, is that when democracy comes, the people turn on each other. So this is what happened in Iraq. The statue came down of Saddam Hussein, and that minute, every citizen became a political threat to every other citizen. Before, the only political threat you had was from one man, and he was a long way away. Now, with democracy, your neighbors are a threat to you, right? And so people start asking, are you a Sunni or are you a Shia, right? Before democracy came to Iraq, people didn't know who was Shia and who was Sunni. They didn't know. They intermarried. And then when democracy came, they couldn't even live next to each other.
I would argue that humans turned on each other long before democracy. It's just like human nature.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would just say that having a common decision making process where you have to come to a conclusion and get an action plan, and you have to decide what you're going to do next. Once you're doing that, it makes everything worse. People can turn on each other, absolutely. Yeah. But
it's always been a me versus you mentality.
I think there has. If you look at like the Turkish Empire, right? The Ottoman Empire lasted 1,000 years, and the Sultan is absolute ruler, right? The Sultan owns everything, has complete power, and it's the most diverse empire that ever existed. Had Christians, Muslims, they didn't turn on each other. There wasn't inter conflict until democracy came, and then that's when it became a problem. But if you look at a country like Iraq was the ultimate diversity country, right? It had Armenians, it had Arabs, it had Turkmens, it had Jews. I mean, before the state of Israel was established, Baghdad was the biggest Jewish city in the world. Iraq was the ultimate diversity. And then as soon as democracy comes, that's all destroyed.
Yeah. Well, before we get too far, Pastor Dave, did you have any thoughts to my question? As a nation, how do we help with this diversity struggle?
I again understand that when democracy is presented, it not only invites different voices into the table, around the table, and trying to reach for common good of each other, but then at the same time, democracy also opens the door for other challenges that many times you didn't anticipate. So I know that that's there as well. But I think when it comes to diversity, just a blanket, I don't think people just are mad at any people group for not embracing diversity. I think what happens is in the diversity, every people group is aware of who is getting better treatment than the other one. And so when that is part of the discussion, then it's wondering why. The question I think that the different groups are asking is, why is one group getting something that I'm not getting? And they're not hating the other group simply because you don't basically embrace or see the value of every group. I think the diversity question is in a diverse economy or a diverse democracy, every group then must have equality of a sort within its midst. That's what is being asked. Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate that.
If you go back to the story about the book group, right? And now you got diversity in the book group, right? You want one group wants to go someplace cheap, and the other group wants to go someplace healthy, right? And so then now we're divided up. We got the two groups, and they're talking to each other behind the other guy's backs, trying to manipulate how they're going to go to lunch next time, right? And so the problem becomes when people start believing that, hey, we're going to the healthy place 3 out of 4 times, and we're only going to the cheap place 1 out of every 4 times. They're getting better treatment, and that's where the danger is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was thinking, and not to belabor this point because I think we're right at the same place. But there's a commercial, and I cannot remember the commercial, the reason of this commercial. But in the commercial, a lady says, I'm going to give a lollipop to both of you. Or I'm going to give I'm going to give you a lollipop to both of you. So they're children that she's talking to. And she gives the first child a lollipop, and it's just a little lollipop on a stick. But to the other child, she gives a lollipop, but it's that big round lollipop and a stick. And the little girl is the one who says, hey, that's not fair. She doesn't understand what democracy is, but what she understands is for some reason, somebody was given more when it seems like the question at hand was we both were to receive equal gifts. And I think that's where confusion comes in when we talk about diversity. It's not that the other one doesn't want, candy to be given. It says we thought we would both get candy. Now, since we both did not get candy, now we have a problem. I'm going to have to see how I rectify that. Yeah. So, yeah, diversity, I think, has to be understood for what is it trying to exhibit. Not just diversity in itself is dangerous. Diversity opens the door to different things. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. So my next question, how does language affect race and ethnicity? I'm going to open up the floor. Either way, either of you can answer that question. There's enough to go around.
Yeah, I remember when I brought up that at one of the meetings that I was sitting in, and Debbie, I think, or not Debbie, but Denise, she said, yeah, I don't think of myself as an English speaker. But that is our primary identity, is our language,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say even in English as being a primary language, I serve on a religious council for an organization that prided itself in its Swedish traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so oftentimes, looking back at its early history, even though it's a very well diverse group now, you can still hear people say, our Swedish traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens when people who are not Swedish hear that? What you're hearing is, I'm better because of my language, culture, ethnic group.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a time we all only spoke Swedish. And so I'm going, again, language is that powerful because it screams out identity. It screams out a republic of a people. It screams out, it can scream out our faith traditions.
Mm-hmm.
It can say all of those things. And I just think we need to be cognizant of the power of language because it can also exclude other languages, that are in that context. But language, I very much agree with Tom, is central to a government. That language is going to play, to me, the highest point of discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, language is about connection, and the loss of language is, the loss of culture and heritage, So I totally agree with that, with Tom. People communicate with one another.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, I know that firsthand when I lived in Africa, and I did not speak the tribal language, and nor did Debbie speak the tribal language. We were held in suspect, even though our skin colors were the same.
I really believe that.
Because our language
when you can, was
not the same. That's when people let it be known you're not one of us.
Yeah, when you can communicate, you can build relationships, break down those walls, create a sense of community,
You cannot build relationships. That's exactly
Yeah.
true. We don't like to say that, but that's true. It is so true. You cannot build relationships.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that we invaded
Right.
Iraq
So kind
with
of,
the intent of installing democracy. They had three major languages there, and we didn't do anything to address it.
right. So then back to my original question, what it seems like language is kind of more, if there's miscommunication, that could be more dangerous because there's language in religion, there's language behind your race and ethnicity. So, that miscommunication in language, I would say it would be the most dangerous. Think of all the wars we've had, simply because of misunderstanding and miscommunication.
That's evident,
So,
Jordan. It's very evident when we read scriptures in the Genesis text, and I believe it's somewhere around the 5th chapter. We have where men and women in the Tower of Babel discussion. And no, it's probably around chapter 10. I think it's closer to chapter 10 in Genesis, where they said, we want to build a tower so we can be in conversation basically with God. So they wanted to build this tower up, and it was every man, and I think the emphasis of the text is all the people groups together spoke one language. So in one language, they themselves spoke at God. And so God then comes, according to the text, God comes down and he scatters them, and he also scatters their language. And so now in that scattering, each people group would have to understand their identity and who they are individually. And so, but now flip it to the New Testament, you come into the book of Acts on the day of Pentecost, where back again, they all spoke one language. Even though there were multiple ethnicities at the day of Pentecost, the power was in the same language as understood through the Holy Spirit. And so language is very powerful. It can scatter, or it has the bridges that people can come together in. And we just see that in scriptures. We just see that very clearly, the power of language.
And successful bilingual democracies, there are not many examples of it.
Right.
The difference between a Ukrainian person and a Russian person, they look the same, right? I mean, the difference is language.
Is language.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we're very blessed to have a democracy that has one language. It's a real starting point. Mm-hmm. It's a real strength for us.
Mm-hmm. So to my next question, race. We were speaking about race as well. How does race affect our culture, or how does race affect culture in general?
I think it hinges right where we are right now, is understanding the power of diversity of race. And then it also talks about how race also scatters. But because we as a country are a country, some people use the term of a melting pot. We are, we've come from several different other nations or people groups that spoke other languages in this and cultures in this country. Our unifying identity, again, which is hard for some, is our one language. Okay, we're one language of people, but we are many different ethnic groups, but we still have the one language. And so in that's what unifies us as the 50 states together. We have subcultures, but our dominant life, we acknowledge in our humanness, is not we're all of the same ethnicity group. It says we're all of the same human race, and we speak the same language, which seems to say for me is that there is a common respect among us in our diversity. It's just at times we don't live that out. We just don't live that out.
Yeah,
right. Race really doesn't exist biologically.
Yeah, race is a social construct. We're very well aware of that. It's a social construct.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
But the thing I would say about our situation in our democracy is I would always put it as language is the most important, religion has the second most danger to divide, and race has the third most potential to divide. And the reason I would say that, just based on the history of democracies failing, you got plenty of examples where two languages didn't work out. You got a lot of examples where religion was a real problem. There aren't many examples where race is a problem, but there probably aren't many countries that have racial differences where the history that we have is so negative. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, if we were just here, probably our skin color wouldn't matter too much, but there's this whole history that goes with it, and that's what the problem is.
Right.
It's trying to get past what happened, forgive what happened, reconcile what happened, so we can work together and try to build a better future for all of us. But again, I would emphasize for us is being able to redistribute wealth across racial lines.
Right.
So when Clinton was doing his, I don't know if I should even use this word, but when Clinton was doing his healthcare thing, they were talking about welfare moms, mm-hmm. That are making a ton of money by just having babies. Probably none of it was true, but that was one of the things that really made it difficult for redistribution of wealth to happen across racial lines in our country. So what we have to be able to do is the goal is to be able to help poor people and not let the racial difference interfere from doing that. And that's where we need to get to.
Jordan, when I said that race is a social construct, it's something that we have used as a weapon against another another group. It's something we have chosen to take as a physical identity, and it has also been used in how we've wielded power. And I think of the small country in Central Africa, which we all know in 1994 was its genocide, was the country of Rwanda. And the country of Rwanda, its war were people of the same race against one another, but they were able to go, but the markings that a Tutsi had was different from the markings of a Hutu, and it set up enough foundation that it was a physical appearance that they could go into war with each other. And race seems to always be the quickest, easiest tool to go into an opposition with a neighbor. It's, I think, because our eyes see exactly what we want to see. If I want to see that tulips are an ugly flower and roses are a beautiful flower, I no longer just see a flower. I have now physically just identified something. One is greater and one is less. And race seems to always, when we descend to our issues based on race, it is a physical marker that we will use to determine how we will use power toward or against that group. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Race is used to establish and justify systems of power, privilege, oppression, disenfranchisement, things like that. It's that me and you mentality since the beginning.
I was just going to say that, Ken Burns did a thing on Vietnam, and it was really interesting. He interviewed a lot of regular soldiers, but one of the things that one of the guys really struck me, he said, if you're going to send a bunch of poor people, draft them into the army and send them over to the other side of the world to defend your trade routes, you should at least allow the poor soldiers a bit of racism to justify what they're doing for themselves. Because you're being asked to go out there and burn down a village, right? And it's like, I need something. Okay, I don't think I'm going to be able to just run out here and burn down this village. I need something. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I got to have something, you know. So, and I think if you think of racism in those terms, it's kind of interesting. Yeah. And you know, there's a real popular show on now about the Scottish English wars. And they speak of each other in total racist terms, and it's like, you guys do look identical, you know. I mean, but anyway, I think that, you know, war and racism are really closely associated.
Very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say war is kind of a culmination of all racial, religious, and, you know, language barriers we all face. You know, it's just a mixture of them all. Would you say that there was more racial wars? Would you believe there's more religious wars, or maybe, you know, language wars or miscommunication wars?
What do you think about that, Dave?
I would think there are more political wars, not the race wars. I see wars as the majority of wars is more of a power grab of some sort, and not to nullify that countries have been under persecution because of their faith, but it just seems to me that the majority of wars are wars that we've seen based on people opposition of power and land grab or whatever. But I don't see religion. I'm not saying people are not persecuted, but I don't see that as being the major wars are not built on a religion anymore. No.
Yeah, to me, wars are economic activities. Yeah, and then religion, race, all that stuff is just to justify it so you can feel better about what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah.
But if you look at the 30 years
historically
war,
speaking. Yeah. Okay. What were you going to say, Tom?
I was just going to say that 30 years war would be the classic religious war in Europe, and it was Catholics against Protestants, and the Catholic French government sided with the Protestants and saved the Protestant cause. And the leader of the French government was a cardinal in the Catholic Church, and he sided with the Protestants because that was in his best interest. Big chessboard, you know. So, to me, wars are economic. They're about power, land grabs, like the Reverend was saying, and, you know, the race, religion stuff is all a justification for it. Mm-hmm. But I think that people are really into religion. Mm-hmm. People from another religion can be very threatening. They may convert my kids. They may, you know, because the religion is so much the cohesion of society, right? You know, in a lot of ways, you know, I go to church and I hear people proselytizing in, you know, these 100% Muslim countries. And I get that, you know, I get what you're doing, but in a lot of ways, I mean, I don't know if it's helping, you know.
Different religions might as well be different languages. Let's see. Sorry.
And that's one of the reasons why we emphasized religion so much at the beginning of our country. You know, separation of church and state, you know, Thomas Jefferson was all into it, is because the previous attempt at democracy in England back in the home country was divided by religion.
Right.
The Protestant sects couldn't get along, and that's what made Parliament unable to rule in the king's place.
The loss of love for the neighbor, you know, is the loss of faith in each other, essentially.
there's a certainty thing too, right? Where religion tends to have a certainty aspect to it too, and that can be very putting off to the other people. And in a lot of ways, the thing that really disappoints me about people who aren't Christians is that or the thing that disappoints me most about the church in their messaging to people who aren't Christians is, to me, people who aren't Christian view the Christian church as a bastion of certainty, right? Where you'd study the Bible and then the truth and better than anyone else. And that's very putting off. But to me, the message of Christianity is much more of God has a plan for all of us and we don't understand it. We don't know what it is. So to me, the message of the Christian message is much more of an uncertainty message than a certainty one.
Yeah, I would just echo off of Tom that religion has been quite divisive, and Tom and I have talked a lot about the term of certainty versus looking at, I see Christianity as being a religion that talks about alternative lifestyle living based on the teachings of a creator, where every man and woman can be equally blessed by his presence and see the growth of this world even before the next world should ever come into an existence. That there is a way that we can prosper together. And that is to me, the message of the Christian gospel. But what we have taken it to is we've bit off pieces and chunks, and we're saying, I will get my group to know that we are better than the rest, and we are cooler than the rest, and we are in God better than the rest. And I don't think that's the message of Christianity. Christianity seems to say, when I look at the teachings of Jesus Christ says, hey, the way you are living today is detrimental to your neighbor, and it's also going to be detrimental to yourself. And so Jesus begins to say, then, I want to offer you the benefit of another type of civilization or another type of kingdom that benefits all, no matter who you are, no matter what your class is, no matter what your social status is, no matter, where you come from, you can enjoy this wonderful life here on earth, but it won't just be for you, but it will be for all of those who embrace my teachings. And so we don't seem to want to accept that. We want to accept it's my group and not your group. And I think we totally miss it. And so I think, and I'll say this real quick, what happens is all the things we've been talking about on this podcast is wars come up, hatreds come up, ethnicity comes up, individual destruction comes up. All of those negative things that we so much don't want are the result of us living in this other world life of, we will take care of ourselves, but you cannot do it unless there's a higher controlling, I think, spiritual component to your life. You don't even see you don't even see how democracy can benefit us as a people, even though it has some negativity that can come through it. It's to me, until your eyes are open, Jesus wanted to open our eyes to the value of all of human creation and what it would take to preserve it both now and in the future.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And well, in today's day and age, people just judge without even really knowing what they're judging. They just automatically dislike, and if they took the time to truly look, they can find trust in a higher power. I mean, in God and in Jesus. And if, it gives them that ability to step outside themselves to truly know, love somebody for where they are, not love them for what your beliefs are or your fears, essentially, because that's what a lot of it is fears.
But that's what democracy is. That's what democracy is. That's the way I see it. That's the danger of it. It says it's okay to judge. You're a voter. Judge that guy, whether he's okay or not. Judge the other people whether they're okay. The democracy is your opinion matters, right? Go ahead and judge. It's okay to judge the other people. That's what I don't think that's the correct message of democracy, but it can go there, right? You get to vote. Your opinion is important. You're deciding the government. It's okay for you to judge the other people, and it's not.
Right. They're ruling in fear. Yeah. Absolutely. But any final thoughts before we? Yeah. Any final thoughts, Tom, before we wrap things up?
Just that I think you're doing a really good job, Jordan. I really appreciate you being involved in this conversation with us. I really do. And,
I appreciate that. Yeah, I get stage fright, but I'm impressing myself, But
also the Reverend too, because Reverend always says, are we friends? And I tell him, yeah, we're friends, but you're still my teacher. So it's not really an equal relationship. You're my, you're my rabbi. You're my sensei.
Okay.
I still believe he's my friend.
Yeah, well, Pastor Dave has got me to step outside myself quite a few times in the time I've known him. So
I think that's
he is a teacher. Absolutely.
Yeah, we all have something to share and to give. That's the best part about life. Thanks, Jordan, for what you're doing. Thank you, man.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Thomas. It was a pleasure having this conversation.